Hello, I'm Amanda Freitag-Thomas, the General Manager of Envision by World Strides. At Envision by World Strides, we provide immersive career exploration and leadership development programs for elementary, middle, and high school students. You can learn more about what we offer by going to our website, www.envisionexperience.com, and clicking on our programs. I'm excited we can bring a part of the Envision experience into your homes with this panel session featuring two speakers of our national security program. They address topics such as what they want to see and hear in the first 100 days of the new administration, security issues and threats, perspectives on differing points of view, and guidance for young people who seek to be more engaged in current events and politics. Enjoy.
Hello, welcome to Envision by World Strides Inaugural Speaker Series. My name is Milani Porter and I'm your moderator for today's conversation on Thursday, January 7th. I have the very unique pleasure of recruiting some fascinating industry professionals to attend Envision's programs. One of our largest programs is actually the National Youth Leadership Forum on National Security. This is an intensive experience that allows high school students from across the country explore career paths in the fields of national security, intelligence, and diplomacy. Today we are joined by some of our absolute favorite guest speakers and career panelists, Mark Khanord and Eric Cutner. I'd like to take a moment now for you both to introduce yourselves. Mark, I'll start with you.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Mark Khanord. I'm a recently retired Foreign Service diplomat and federal law enforcement officer with the Department of State after about a 29-year career that actually started with the United States Air Force. So I started in the Air Force and then jumped over to the civilian life. Spent about half of that time overseas, serving at some of our U.S. embassies in the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America, and Central and South Asia. And about half domestically assigned to some positions within the U.S. Department of State, which is the foreign policy arm and policymaker of the U.S. government. I've also served a couple of assignments in the interagency, which is basically the civilian side of the federal government. It's just a term that we use to describe the civilian side of federal government, as well as a couple of assignments alongside DoD partners at U.S. Central Command and within the Defense Intelligence Agency. I started out with a commission in the Air Force after graduating from North Carolina State University in 1989. I received a couple of degrees, a Bachelor of Science in Political Science and another in Economics. And I was an overachiever, so I had to get that extra minor in industrial engineering. I later went to graduate school, courtesy of my employer at the National Defense University, the National Military Intelligence University, and received a master's degree from them in strategic intelligence. And I've been able to use that considerably over the years to kind of augment my day job and what I've been doing with the State Department. As of retirement, I'm currently a risk and strategy consultant for a private company that has international operations primarily in the Middle East and Africa.
Thank you, Mark. Eric, would you mind telling us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, so it's Eric Cutner, pronouns he, him. And I'm originally born in New York City, which, as I like to say, is the only place in the entire universe you can call the city. No offense to anybody else in the rest of the world who believes any other city is like that. There are lots of great cities in the world, but New York is New York. My family is a predominantly New York City family, and although most have maneuvered out in some way, shape, or form, and my parents were my father's actually who just unfortunately passed away in 2020 was an astrophysicist who actually had gone to Princeton and Columbia University for his PhD, and then ended up getting a job at RPI or Rensselaer up in Troy, New York. My mother's a computer scientist, IT specialist sort of person who's awesome at all of those things, as well as being a parent. And she ended up going to Barnard and then NYU, where she got a master's in computer science. So I had a family of that type of high-powered thinking and with some expectations. And then I say I was born in New York City, but within 2.5 years or so of my birth, my parents kidnapped me and took me to Troy, New York for what became their jobs at RPI, as I mentioned earlier, where my dad was a physics professor for many, probably almost 2 decades. My mother worked in the computing center there at the forefront of a lot of modern computer communication sorts of things. So just a great family background. Went to an inner city public school system. Ended up going to Troy High School in Troy, New York, and then got a little change in education as I followed in my father's footsteps and headed to New Jersey for an undergraduate degree at Princeton University. That's my only degree, so I have a bachelor's in physics from Princeton. And I also, while I was there, as one of my advisors in the physics department used to like to say, when I'd meet with him, he'd say, Eric, I love meeting with you because you're really the only physics major I don't have to beg, plead, etc. with to get to take things other than sciences, math, engineering, etc. So I took a lot of history, a lot of French, a lot of literature, and a whole lot of other stuff that I was interested in. And it turns out that's just how I've been my whole life, and I've continued to be that way. I've just love learning, and I love helping other people learn where possible. So after college, I did not go the path that I thought I would go most of my life of going and getting a PhD in a science, most likely physics or engineering of some sort, and decided to make an attempt at the side of my brain or whatever that loved the sports and entertainment world. I've been a competitive tennis player and have a lot of connections, coaching and otherwise, to a lot of sports. So anyway, my first years out of school, I actually ended up spending probably from about 1995 when I graduated till about in 2002, predominantly focused on the sports and entertainment world. Everything from starting as a event staff intern for, and I ended up being kind of an intern type person for one of the top sports management companies in the world, to eventually having my own little sports marketing company based out of upstate New York. But we used to run professional tennis tournaments actually in Hawaii, which was interesting, a place I'd gotten to know in my youth and later in life as well for various reasons. In more recent years, when I end up in Hawaii, it's less about sports, and it's more often to visit people at PACOM, or now what they call Indo-PACOM, which is the combatant command for the entire Indo-Pacific region, and where I've known some of the 4 3-star, et cetera, and other people who worked for them types over the years. So anyway, but there was a time when I was, where I had connection to some interesting places for sports related work. I always tell people that experience from 95 through 2002, 3-ish was actually a way I learned, because sports and entertainment is actually something that is, A, it's a business, and B, it is a world that touches politics and policy actually every day in all sorts of ways. I was in all sorts of interesting worlds related to, say, labor relations and other types of legal challenge things and civil rights and all these other, as a lot of people who are listening to us now, with a lot of things going on right now, with the pro athletes out there, especially the NBA and some others pushing at the forefront of pushing civil rights issues and those types of things. I mean, those things were also going on back when I was kind of spending more of my time in sports than in other things. So I also got to know how to run a business, at least a small business, and start a small business, and deal with a lot of big businesses and not-for-profits. And eventually what happened was I decided I liked business, but I realized I liked public policy. I realized I liked public service. And what happened was I was watching, as I try to wrap up, I was watching my brother, who's much younger, but also who had gone to Princeton. And he was the first person, I like to say, in my family, since my grandfather, who was a combat surgeon in the Army in World War II in Europe, also from New York City. My brother was the first person, obviously, in generations who really did real public service like that. And he's been a firefighter paramedic sort for decades at this point, including a decade at Fairfax County Fire Rescue, where he's also on Virginia Task Force 1, which is one of the top urban search and rescue teams on the planet. And so late in his princely career, he ended up becoming an EMT with the Princeton Rescue Squad, and I ended up years later back in Princeton around 2002-3, joined the squad, and from 3 to 5, I actually became an EMT, took hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of EMS and rescue calls. My brother and I used to both do vehicle rescue and other types of rescue training and work together, among other things. And I ended up becoming the vice president and the president of the Princeton Rescue Squad, dealing with town council, borough council, mayors, leadership, university leadership, and funders from the region of New Jersey we were in, and that got me even more interested in public policy. So I started realizing that there were all these challenges in what was then, Homeland Security and other areas that certainly related to emergency management and emergency services, which I was now then volunteering in and dealing with almost every day, in addition to having a business career as a management business consultant, which I still do as well. And so over the years, my management and business consulting clients started to become more like national security, IT, cyber, health IT, and a lot of other things, not just, say, sports and entertainment. And at the same time, from a public policy perspective, for the last 15 years, I've basically, since around 2004-5, I've basically spent a lot of my time doing public policy, including running for Congress recently, which I'm sure people might have questions about. So anyway, I got into national security and a lot of other areas over the years. You could tell for various reasons I have a lot of interest in and capacity to deal with a lot of different areas, but national security is one of my favorites and one of the ones I deal with almost every day. So I'll wrap with that. And like I said, I'm sure the questions will bring out more of some of what I've done.
Wow, I'm obviously in the presence of the experts, so let's get into it. As we all know, 2020 was quite an eventful year for our nation. More Americans voted in the 2020 election than any other election in 120 years. I know many of us sat anxiously by our televisions and phones waiting for the election results before finally receiving the news of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's historic win. What do you all hope to hear in the inaugural acceptance speech? Mark, I'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. Well, one of the first things I would like to hear is a strong message of unity, that the election is over, that the country, it's experienced quite a bit of conflict in the last several years, a contested administration. So I would like to hear, number one, a very, very strong message of unity to try and bring the country together and get some healing going. Obviously, I'd like to hear some updates on whether there are going to be any changes on dealing with the pandemic. That's first and foremost in terms of a public health and safety issue that is front and center and has had a tremendous impact on our nation and the world over the last almost a year now. So I'd like to hear something strong about that, particularly if the Biden administration is going to be taking us in any type of different direction than the outgoing administration. And then finally, I would like to hear maybe at least some tidbits or heads up on whether there are any intended major divergences in foreign policy related to, the outgoing administration, whether there are going to be, immediate rollbacks on some of the things that were done over the last 4 years that will impact our alliances, our relationships, our competitiveness, and the perceptions that both our friends and our competitors around the world will have based on those directions or new directions, if they so be.
Thank you, Mark. And Eric, I'd share the same question with you.
So I'll say one. I'll echo or say I totally agree. I mean, actually, with Mark's whole list, certainly things I'm interested in, and the bipartisan, unity side. I like to say nonpartisan. Even I've spent many years, even for Congress, I ended up running as a moderate Democrat because I'm a Democrat, and it's hard to. But I often tell people I really don't like parties and the party system, and I don't like either party. I understand and am fine dealing with the Democratic Party for running for office. It's hard to run as an independent, is my opinion, and that's one of the reasons, or otherwise I probably would have run it as an independent. I really am like I want everybody else to be and hope everyone else is. I've always been an independent thinker. I would love to encourage that. And so, I think everybody should come to their own beliefs and ideas and ideals and everything else. From the perspective, also say, just so people understand, a lot of what I've pushed for years, I've probably spent. I started getting really connected into the DC area around 2006-07. So I was still in Jersey, but it got to the point where I was hanging out in DC. I feel like it was probably almost a week a month by maybe 2008 or so. I spent a year or two with building up a lot of connections into the George W. Bush administration and had a lot of interesting colleagues there. And then even with the Obama administration coming in with 8 years there, I made zillions of great connections and had a lot of great interactions, including some advisory interactions with some interesting people in a lot of different circles, not just national security, but including national security. So I love, and I come at this a lot, so I tend not to come at things politically. I mean, nobody can get around from things being political, but I've told people for years, I've learned from a lot of moderate Republicans and from a lot of moderate Democrats and a lot of independents and people who are more to the fringe, as they say, on both sides. So I've always been, I'm the type of person who likes to, try to, as best I can, listen to all sides. And I think actually it's interestingly one of the reasons when I ran for Congress, one of the things I found out is I actually did have supporters, everything from Trump supporters to far left supporters, and probably from support predominantly in the middle, which would make sense. But a lot of people on all sides who liked the idea of somebody they felt like was the kind of person who, even if they knew I may even never do anything they wanted them to get done, especially say some of my Trump supporter friends where a lot of what that President Trump has pushed for, I don't believe in. At the same time, my friends and colleagues who support him still have told me things like they know and trust at least that I'll give them the platform to hear what they have to say. And that I believe in getting people together to talk from a whole set of diverse backgrounds, of all kinds of backgrounds and thinking. And I think that's the way to solve problems. So I've spent many years trying to push for unity. I've been in a lot of circles with people who talk bipartisanship. One of my good buddies was the spokesman for the 9/11 Commission, and I've also had the honor of having Governor Tom Kean as a keynote at a conference I actually co-created and put together at Princeton many years ago on Homeland Security, and he was, for those who don't know, the chairman of the 9/11 Commission. So being around people like that, especially my friend, the former spokesman for the commission, he was a very moderate Republican who is a who always preached bipartisanship big time to me. And so I've been a big bipartisan push person. But in more recent years, I've realized that it really should be nonpartisanship. So I really basically ran my campaign on, I want to see nonpartisanship. So I don't think bipartisanship is good enough. I want to see people, I realize there's politics, but so when it comes back to things like that, that's the kind of thing I want to hear in an inaugural speech. I want to hear more. I want to hear, I'm sure I'll hear about bipartisanship, but I want to hear it extended into what I think is the more proper answer, the more correct answer, which is nonpartisanship. Let's all on any issue, let's all be able to have reasonable, rational, civil, respectful, thoughtful, cooperative, collaborative conversation. And try to solve problems and challenges. More importantly, try to prevent problems and challenges. So, whether it's COVID or any number of other things, I'm the kind of person who believes that COVID, like a lot of other things in our history, could have been prevented 100% if we'd had a whole different set of thinking and systems in place years ago, and or certainly even months before it happened last year, 2 years ago now, in 2019, a year and a half or so ago. And I'm the kind of person who certainly believes that once it happened, we basically could have had virtually zero impact on Americans, as far as deaths and ill, but even without a vaccine. So it's a lot of it. It's our fault, and so I think that's. I want to hear, I don't just want to hear. I want to hear this in an inaugural speech because messaging is crucial, and I'd like the messaging in the inaugural, speech to be great, hopefully. But at the same time, it's more important to me what the administration does. So.
You both have mentioned that unifying the country is paramount right now. What do you think the president should focus on in the first 100 days of office?
Well, basically, to reiterate what Eric just said about the unity message, should permeate all policy initiatives. In other words, I mean, traditionally, let's face it, a Democrat to a Democrat administration, a Republican to a Republican administration there's been very limited amounts of change, certainly in the foreign policy realm, more so on the domestic side. But even from a domestic to a Republican or a Republican to a Democratic administration, the measurables, traditionally at least, have been very subtle in terms of foreign policy changes in direction. However, because the previous or the outgoing administration under President Trump, he mixed things up quite a bit. And so whether you're Republican or Democrat, it really doesn't matter. The bottom line is that he did change things up on the foreign policy realm. I mean, he challenged our allies to step up to the table. He challenged our competitors to, make a better deal or to provide for some concessions. And so whether you're Republican or Democrat, again, it's irrelevant. These are the things that he did. And they were, on many levels, substantially different now than the previous administration under Obama, for good or for bad. There were other things that he did in the foreign policy realm that actually just continued to toe the line. Some things. I think the media in the country played up the differences, certainly, for good or for bad. So I would like to see in the first 100 days, a real clear outline and commitment to how he's going to bring the country, around, both in the foreign policy realm, national security realm, and on domestic policy, and really stake out the differences then that the Biden-Harris campaigned on. That there were going to be a lot of differences, a lot of changes. Well, I would like to see those now begin to unfold in those 100 days as promised. And I think most Americans would, again, whether you're on the left or right side of the aisle.
Certainly. Eric, what would you like to see prioritized in the first 100 days of office?
And Mark's comments also reminded me, I kind of forgot to say in my previous answer, it relates to this as well, that I think I was about to say in the previous answer that I'm also the kind of person who, didn't hesitate back when George W. Bush was president to want to be around people who were working for him and try to be helpful if I could, and try to learn from them and try to do things where I could be helpful. Obviously in the Obama administration. And then the thing I didn't get to was even when Donald Trump came in, who I did not want to see as president, not because he was a Republican, but because I had a feeling he was going to be what we've seen, is that I even when he first came in, I kind of said to myself, okay, this may be the first president in history who I don't think I may get, I may never want to meet him. As it's turned out, I actually got through 4 years, and I actually have not that I've met any other president yet, but I've met a lot of people who are very close advisors to presidents, and lots of very high level people in cabinet, secretaries and the like. And I guess what I'm saying is, even though I came into his administration times, thinking about what do I want to do I want to not help, or do I not? That I never really bought into I didn't want to help. I started in with, okay, I may never want to meet him, but let me find reasonable people of which I knew there were lots of reasonable people I could talk to and deal with, and who would I could continue to interface with various departments and agencies that I didn't have to look at. I've tried never to look at these things as the party. I try to look at it as there are people. If people are willing to listen to me and I'm willing to listen to them, and we're willing to have great, have conversations and brainstorm and do it in a nonpartisan way, then I'm open to having conversations and trying to be helpful. So I think that's important for people who are listening out there to know that I'm one of those people who's spent also decades preaching that you should be willing to work in any administration. It doesn't matter what party the administration is, or in a house for, if you're a Republican, you should still be willing to work for a Democrat, and vice versa, for instance. I think that's important. I was just talking to a buddy of mine the other day about this, who served in the Obama administration at a high level position. And we were both talking about this exact topic of we should really be encouraging people, and it shouldn't be the token cabinet secretary who's a Republican in a Democratic administration, or vice versa. It should really be, that you just have a whole set of everything, of all types of backgrounds, parties, and otherwise, in every administration. So that's something I wanted to get out there, that I did spend the last 4 years, until about a year or so ago, interfacing with friends and colleagues in the Trump administration in the same types of ways I did for the previous 9 or 10 years with 2 other administrations, and being helpful where I could. But it got to the point, as I like to tell people, not from a political perspective, and this goes to part of the answering the first 100 days thing, which is a large part for me was even in the rare thing I could see that I liked the Trump administration doing, it would still get superseded by he's the way he would make everybody, including my colleagues in the military, just be sitting on pins and needles trying to figure out what shoe's going to drop next, or what bomb he's going to potentially drop next, and that kind of situation, and the pressure that he put especially the national security establishment under. If I look at it as if you want military people in uniform to be apolitical, and I believe, look, you can tell from what I'm saying, I believe all people in government should be apolitical, but at the same time, that's difficult to get to right now. But at the moment, we do have a military that tries to be apolitical, especially the uniform side. And the uniform side has been put under a lot of pressure in the Trump administration to do things that even some of the worst presidents in history haven't put it under that much pressure. And for that, so it's not a political reason, it's a real nuts and bolts reason. And I want to hear from the Biden administration, the Biden-Harris administration, not just here, but also hopefully see what they're really going to do on the ground to get control back of those types of situations and bring stability back to our national security and to all other arenas. So I think that's a big thing I'm looking for in the first 100 days. And everything else to me falls off of that. All my interests in what they do about COVID and a lot of other things come from getting back to a stable environment to operate in. I'll also say one of the things I don't think I'm going to hear from is, as you could guess from some of my answers previously, I'm a big resilience. How does the country get through adapting and evolving and dealing with change? And I'm a big supporter of the only way you could do that is if you think long term, and a big global, not just global, but universal view. And as I like to say, one of my favorite things to say is we need to get out of crisis mode into what I call vision strategy mode. And vision strategy mode means you deal with everything, whether a crisis or not, with a long-term, universal, big picture thinking, along with some granular thinking to get some stuff done on the ground. And I have not seen any administration in history who does that. So I think we're going to get, with the Biden administration, we'll get a lot better than we've had the last 4 years in its stability and resilience and some other things I'm talking about. But I'd love to see a Biden administration leap ahead of probably any administration in the history of the U.S. and actually think long-term in a real way and act long-term in a real way.
Mark, with your experience in managing and assessing large-scale security operations, do you anticipate any new threats to national security with this change in administration?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. That's the million-dollar question that, alluding to what Eric said about, getting out of crisis mode and trying to project ahead in our assessments. I mean, we do national intelligence estimates. We have, analysts that try and project forward and anticipate, new and emergent threats. Sometimes, we get it right and sometimes we miss the ball. But specifically related to entirely new threats, I think we're aware of what's on the horizon. I mean, we obviously have our traditional adversaries on the international scene. Russia and China are clearly competitors slash adversaries. We have the traditional ones: North Korea, Iran. There are others. It's really a matter of the tools that are in play as to what tools can be brought to bear that present themselves as threats. And the first one that comes to my mind, of course, is cyber. People tend to often think of threats as being, in the physical world. Obviously, weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, nuclear, and radiological weapons have been around for a while. Although they've largely been dismissed by the civilized world for organized use in a military way. These types of things do exist, and they could be, potentially used by asymmetric actors who get their hands on them. But I think my real fear is the still evolving and increasing cyber threat, because not only can that be used in a military way, against traditional military targets, but that can be used, in an economic, a political, a societal, a cultural way. And we saw allegations of this going back, to our last election, where there were allegations at least of, foreign interference in our elections using cyber tools. Yeah, and assorted other propaganda and, messaging, internet, related things due to the speed of information and how information can be manipulated, or outright sabotaged or stolen, in the case of, the use of some of the cyber tools. So, you know, entirely new things that haven't been conceived. No, I don't really see that. I think we've conceived what the threats are. We may not fully understand exactly the nature and the magnitude of the damage that can be caused by them. And perhaps we certainly haven't established, the necessary defenses. We're a vulnerable nation, as are many nations around the world to, cyber attack. Bringing down a power grid, bringing down an air traffic control system, crashing planes, the financial sector. Consider the mayhem that would be caused if the international banking system were all of a sudden, hijacked and put on ransomware, or something like that. I mean, we see the exploitation that's going on every day. Companies are losing billions and billions of dollars. We just had a recent one, where government systems, as well as industrial complex companies, many, were attacked and impacted. So again, I see this as probably one of the more menacing threats going forward. We understand that it's there. Uh, we may not fully understand how to defend ourselves from it fully, but possibly taking a little bit more of an aggressive defense would be entirely appropriate under the Biden administration.
Okay. Mark, you referenced some of your concerns about the future of cybersecurity. Eric, do you also share those concerns? Or are there any other areas that you can identify as potential threats to national security?
And I've worked a lot in a lot of these areas, cyber included. I'll also preface this with, this is my opportunity to note that I think one of the biggest threats we face, and have always faced, is it's human nature to like silos, to like tribes, to like teams, and all sorts of other things, et cetera, to have a side, so to speak, and boundaries and borders and all these other things, and to look at those things with importance and as if they're real. And I've spent years trying to remind people that none of those things are real. I've summed it up as basically, in recent years, I found an easy way to sum it up for people, which is, many of you I would say, all silos are bad. We should be getting rid of silos. The 9/11 Commission came out and said silos are bad. I hear people from time to time mention that sort of thing, but I rarely see anybody in the government break down and actually have fewer silos. 9/11 happened and we actually created more silos, ultimately. We created a whole world of fusion centers and a whole set of things in the Department of Homeland Security, and a whole host of other things in the Pentagon, and virtually every other department and agency got more things in the state and local level, and even businesses and citizens ended up with all sorts of more silos, not fewer silos. And that just mirrors our response to pretty much everything, if not everything, in our history. It's human nature, but it doesn't mean we can't get better than that. We're going to need to evolve at some point, back to my resilience, adapting, and evolving part. Part of it is one of the things where I get to deal with this these days on a weekly, if not almost daily basis, is in conversations, is the military in recent years has tried, because it's not the only place that uses these terms, but the military has been the staunchest user and abuser of the following terms like cyberspace, space, air, land, sea, or maritime, and a whole, cybersecurity, information warfare, I mean, I could go on and on with all kinds of jargon, basically. Resilience, preparedness, homeland security, and national security, which I start with. I've spent a long time trying to remind people homeland security is part of national security. They're inextricable. It's not even inextricable. There isn't a homeland security. It's all national security. Where would homeland security end? It doesn't exist in reality. In reality, there's national security, and actually, I even argue in reality that there isn't even national security. There's one thing, which is, like I said earlier, the entire universe, and we need people to start thinking bigger. As I like to say, Mother Nature and some of our enemies, whether by accident or not, think a lot bigger than we do, and certainly act maybe more by accident than not, but sometimes on purpose act as if they're looking at a bigger universe than we do. We're always in this crisis thing, barely looking past our noses most days. So what I was going to say with that is one of my favorite phrases in recent years that I made up maybe 2 or 3 years ago to deal with this, especially in military circles, but in all circles, is the only domain, because all those things I mentioned, cyber, space, maritime, sea, land, air, all those things are called domains, especially in the military. And the one thing I've pushed back on is I've said, okay, the only domain that you should think in is the entire universe, which I know sounds big. And the following reason is because physics, as far as we know, is the same throughout the entire universe, as I say with my physics background. And so therefore there aren't these, maybe flying is a little different from this, from that, but we shouldn't have those borders and boundaries because they don't exist in reality. We should learn how to actually operate in a world and think about and act in a world where those boundaries don't exist. Because wherever you put boundaries, and this is something that came out of even 9/11 thinking and other things I dealt with when I got into dealing with law enforcement and other related information technology policy circles and other places, is that wherever you go, and I used to advise the chief of the border patrol on strategy from time to time, among other interesting key people I've advised over the years. A lot of those conversations end up being reminders of things that a lot of those people don't realize, which are, if you have a police, classic example, if you have a police department in a city and you have 4 precincts coming together, 4 regions or areas of response coming together, where they all come together, you might miss what they call a hotspot of crime, because approximately a quarter of the crime in that area might go into each of those 4 precincts data, instead of a whole. If you were looking at a much larger view, now I'd say you should look at the whole universe and then come backwards and not put a border or boundary. I also like to remind people, all information, all data, all humans, and any computers out there, any robots, any artificial intelligence, or any other things any aliens and any other things that are coming for us, a la Terminator or other things we haven't thought of yet. All those things have bias in all sorts of things, including information data, all information data, research, analysis, whatever, is all biased. The trick is to understand the bias so you can try to back a little out, but we're never going to be able to back much of it out. So the trick is then to be able to sift through information and data and work together with others to try to solve problems and most importantly, prevent problems, prevent challenges. So that brings me wrapping back to some of where I got into the domain thing with my talking about the only domain we should think in is the entire universe. And by the way, where I used to get a lot of pushback, even in the military, these days I actually don't get as much pushback, even at the 3- and 4-star level, where the pushback often, I still get pushback about what can they really do day to day to fix, if they agree with me, what can they do day to day to actually make it happen? And I'm still trying to think through some of that with some people. But we know, I'm starting to get more people to understand that what we've been doing for decades and centuries isn't working with these boundaries and borders and things like that. So wrapping back around to cyber, one of the places I really got into this understanding was because I was in a lot of cyber policy circles and still am, including interfacing with high-level people at DHS and the White House years ago in the Obama administration on these types of issues. What I started to say to people and realize was cyber, like every other issue, like Homeland Security, like everything else, is actually part of the entire universe. It's part of all of national security, say, and part of the bigger universe. It's not just our classic cyberspace, actually. And I've for years told people, and have a lot of people who agree with me, that cyberspace doesn't just include the technology, it includes the humans, which are the most important thing. It includes a lot of other aspects of things. And it's as I said earlier, inextricably, I'd love to say, but it's not even inextricable. It's just part of a big picture thing. And that's how the big problem is. Most of the time when we try to deal with cyber, it's people who are looking at about 1% of the problem and don't understand the bigger, especially human challenge and human technology challenges that we face, like, as one of my colleagues likes to say, like hooking everything up willy-nilly to cyberspace instead of having actual plans and systems and ways of doing things that involve less of cyberspace or no cyberspace, to go with current cyberspace, and then we need to spend some time thinking longer term than tomorrow or next year, and actually come up with plans. Most of the people I know who work in the the NSA Cyber Command and the service cyber worlds and other places where I've had the opportunity to talk to people and advise and brainstorm with people occasionally, as well as in the rest of the government at all levels and in the private sector as well. Rarely do I run into people who are really thinking more than days, weeks, months out when it comes to cyber issues, instead of coming up with what do we want the future to look like and how can we prevent the bad things from happening that happen. They just keep trying to put up we say in physical security, just adding more guns, guards, and gates alone doesn't necessarily make you safer.
Right.
The same thing in kind of cyber, having more, better encryption and better password use or no password use or some other things like that. Those things are the same type of thing. Most of the time they don't create, people get around them is my point. So.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like
Yep.
to pivot the conversation towards our students, many of whom will be hearing this. We are obviously living in unprecedented times. What advice can you give to students for discussing politics with friends or family who may not necessarily share their views? Mark?
That's a great question, because I think the ability to talk about politics as an adult starts when you're a child. I understand that we're presenting to a younger audience, not children, but middle school and high school, and I think it's not too soon to learn about being humble, being kind, being polite, professional, civil, listening to understand, not to respond. Being able to articulate your views, and going beyond. And Eric mentioned it a moment ago about bias. Trying to understand yourself so that you can understand others, because I think it's very difficult for human beings who don't have a good sense of themselves, their own awareness, and we all have bias. It's buried deep in our psychology and our emotions. So if there's nothing that we can do about our biases because they're based on our genetics as well as our experiences, we can at least recognize that they exist and maybe accommodate them. And how do we do this? We do this by recognizing that they are there. We listen to other people. We treat them with respect and dignity, because, again, it's never too soon to have a conversation with someone about an important societal issue. I mean, I would expect that today, with the flow of information, the speed, the availability of information, that students in middle school might have very sophisticated conversations, in the lunchroom. But how those conversations are conducted, how disagreements are managed, those are important life skills, and they can't begin too soon. So I think it's very important that young people, students, learn to have discussions, even about thorny, about difficult, sensitive matters, but being able to do that in a polite, civil manner, listening to the other side, asking good questions, listening to the responses, maybe asking more questions, and also at the same time looking at themselves, because if they hear something that they disagree with, it's important to explore that a bit. Well, why do I disagree with that? Does it just not make sense on its face? Is it something that I've experienced in my life? Is it something that I've been told by my parents or by another trusted adult or a friend? Is it something I read on the internet? It's important to ask those types of questions, because it's not only the what, but it's where the information came from. And maybe in the course of that discussion that you have with someone about an issue, and there is disagreement, that you go away from it and you ask yourself questions, and then you try and maybe get a second or third opinion. So I guess what I'm getting at here is to be flexible, be intellectually flexible enough to recognize when, maybe it's time to pivot your position. Maybe it's time to change your mind. And that's not changing who you are. That's not changing your values. That's not changing you as a good person. I mean, it's things like integrity, trust, honesty. Those you are what you are, and there's no room for compromise on those. But as far as our political views or our views about societal issues, those are open for debate, and they should be debated, because that's what we do in our country. And that debate should be conducted civilly, and in a non-violent way with respect and dignity to the other side, because they may not agree, even an opponent, they may not agree with what you've said, but they will remember how you made them feel if you disrespect them. So having a polite, respectful discussion is key. And I think that that's very important that young people today learn, because these are important life skills and you will use them again and again as an adult, and they will take you far.
Thank you, Mark. Civility, honesty, integrity will always matter and it will always be important. I would like to be mindful of the time, but I do have one final question for both of you. Many of our students belong to Generation Z, and as a result, they are not yet of age to vote. What do you recommend students do now to make a difference and have an influence in their respective communities? Eric?
I mean, and there's tons of things people can do. This is the thing, you know, I think, I mean, I was lucky, again, because of kind of some of the family, friend, colleague background of my family growing up, that there was some interest in the, you know, from any number of different places in history and trying not to repeat history and obviously the importance of science, as I mentioned earlier. I mean, probably number one, the importance of civil rights, civil liberties, those sorts of things. All things that I was able to, you know, learn about young and be interested in the world young. I try to, you know, everybody needs to be, I like to say, we need, you know, when people ask me, when should we start, you know, training people for a lot of the things that I'm usually talking to people who are normally more in their 30s, 40s, 50s, if not 60s, 70s, in a lot of the national security, say, circles and other policy circles that I talk to people in and work with people in. You know, when they do ask what should we do about things, a lot of the time my answer is, well, you and everybody else should be learning this stuff in the womb. After that, it's too late. Now, that doesn't mean give up, right? that means try to catch up, which is hard to do. But it's important, you know, people, I find a lot of people I advise, whether I advise a lot of, you know, over the years, a lot of transitioning military and first responders and all sorts of other folks, everybody from you know, everybody from junior officers and enlisted to very senior general officer types. And a lot of the time, you know, I'll be one of the first times they're really having a real conversation about networking. It may be mentioned in some of the courses and things that they do later in their military careers from the Department of Defense, say, or from other places, but usually I end up stunning them with what you can do with networking and how you're better off the earlier you start. You know, I call it networking, building relationships, trust relationships, and getting good at collaborating or working together, and understanding that people are the most important thing, and communication is really the most important thing. So,
Great.
so what I tell people is that they just Mark sounded with his answer to the previous question, but also sounded like some things I was telling a recent college graduate yesterday about a lot of these things, and part of also what I was telling him, and I try to tell a lot of people is even when you're even pre-18. You know, from birth to 18, there's just so many things you can get involved in local organizations. If something interests you, get involved, talk to people. I mean, it's like Mark was alluding to earlier, it's actually great interviewing experience to talk to people about everything and anything, including politics. Now, in a business job interview or whatever, the rule is don't talk about politics. That can be dangerous. But learning to be, if you're good enough to be able to talk politics with people who don't agree with you on politics, even if you shouldn't use that in a job interview, you'll be a better job interviewer because you're able to do that in the circles where it is appropriate.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you. Mark, to reference his point about networking, I'd love to hear your take on the issue as well. What can students do now to have an influence and make a difference in their communities?
I think, you know, again, as Eric said, you know, focusing on your education now, even the classes that you're not interested in. I mean, Eric, you know, opened the discussion with his broad education. He majored in physics, but he took virtually every other class under the sun because he's curious. He's a lifelong learner, and you should be too. Your education it informs your opinions. It will help you throughout your life, even the subjects that you may not think are interesting or even relevant to your life. I mean, you know, I know it might be a little hard to believe, but I was in your shoes, you know, in middle school and high school not very long ago, and I have vivid memories of speaking to people about how this or that class was useless and or I was never going to use it. And lo and behold, someday I did. Virtually, you know, every class that I took, whether it was a science or math class, or, an English class or a history class. Each thing that I learned provided me with another tool that at some point in my life has helped. And I think that applying that type of thinking to your education will create a lifelong learner. It will help you in your relationships. It will help you with your communication. It will help you understand issues that maybe other people struggle to understand, because you're looking at it from a variety of perspectives, from the courses or the things that you understand. A big issue today is the environment. Well, there's a huge science component to environmental issues, but there's also a big public policy issue and an economics issue and a political issue that are all related to that. But if you only know the science, the other aspects of that major societal issue may not make as much sense to you. So a good, broad, inquisitive education where you ask yourself, what are the important things around me? What should I learn about? And you can start asking yourself those questions now, in the middle school. And it will help you along. It will help you apply yourself. And ultimately, when you go to high school, or if you're in high school and then to college or to grad school, or in your employment, it will help you engage whatever you are doing or whoever you are working with on a far more sophisticated level, and you will not regret it. You may not think it's necessary right now, but trust me, I was in your shoes not very long ago. I still have, hair. Most of it's dark, very little gray. So I remember vividly my experiences in school, and so I encourage you to follow in the steps. Be an inquisitive, lifelong learner.
Mark,
If you don't mind, if you don't mind, my just quickly adding that this is my chance to plug having run for Congress. That at virtually any age you can be a campaign volunteer. So people should get in, and it doesn't even have to be federal, like a congressional or a senator, presidential campaign. I mean, those can be great to get involved in. And if you want to do that, do that. But also remember, campaigns for local offices and all sorts of things, and state and all types of things, school boards and others. You can help people who are running for all of those things, and then once you're old enough for any type of position, I encourage people, if you can raise the money to do it. I mean, I advise people don't go into debt, but if you can raise money to, suitably to do it, you should, seriously consider in your life running for office once you reach the ages for those things. And lots of things are just when you get to be 18 or so, in a lot of places. So that's my plug, having run for office myself. It's important. I mean, one thing, I'll kind of wrap with this on that answer, is one of the biggest things I even learned, or really learned from running for Congress, was I had a lot of support from a lot of retired military, even though that's a group that doesn't, as you may see on TV a lot, they really tend not to want to support political candidates. And I think a lot of it was because of my moderateness, among other things, and they knew me, and they kind of trusted that I was looking for things that they were looking for, as far as nonpartisanship and a whole lot of other things. And they trusted me with national security and other issues. But at the same time, after I ran, I would talk to people who supported me, as well as talk to current and retired military. And so talking to current military, like when you're running for office, or current government can be a third rail. They really aren't going to talk to somebody running for Congress, except as to say, kind of, great, you're running, or that kind of thing. But afterward, a lot of people have said to me, it was a really great public service of you to run. So for you students out there, it's a great public service to help people who are running and or run yourself.
Thank you. Eric and Mark, thank you again for such an insightful conversation, and of course for your continued partnership with Envision as we hope to shape the next generation of leaders. Goodbye for now.
Thank you to our moderator and our panelists. We hope you enjoyed this panel session. Feel free to check out our other panel in the Inaugural Speaker Series, as well as our program offerings on our website, www.envisionexperience.com. Thank you, and we hope you can join us this summer.